When CRT comes up and we're talking,
right,
you go to the Marxist stuff first.
so you want me to go to the racist stuff first instead of the Marxist stuff? Is that this entire conversation is, Sitch, I want you to be more like Christopher Ruffo and less like James Lindsay? Is that all you had to say? Calling it racist maybe will have short-term gains, and that's good. But if you want to fucking kill wokeness, you want to destroy it, you have to show people that it's literally fucking Marxism. Well, what we can do going forward is you can, when we have these conversations, you can have the normie take, and I'll have the James Lindsay, nobody cares but our audience take.
The Marxism take?
Yeah, and we can combine our takes, and our chat can hopefully gain the prerequisite knowledge to go forward and spread the good word of the anti-woke, anti-CRT narrative.
So let's move on to the CRT stuff.
CRT.
And you're one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about this is because you're so much on the side of CRT is Marxism, and I'm so much on the side of CRT is racism. And
it's race Marxism. What's the difference?
Well, some people, just the whole idea that it's Marxism makes zero impact on them whatsoever.
I understand that.
Yeah,
I understand.
So, but the perfect split of this is James Lindsay versus Christopher Ruffo, and James Lindsay, is all about telling people critical race theory is Marxism, and kind of waiting for that moment of and I just feel like that moment never comes, and like 50% of the population, they're like, okay, it's Marxism and continue. So I wanted to, I feel like maybe you're going down that road a bit with the Marxism. Every time critical race theory comes up, you trace it back to Marxism. And if it's not a more effective strategy to trace it, to point out the fact that it's racism and racist. And one of the reasons why I was contemplating this was because I've been reading this new book on Civil War, on how Civil Wars start elsewhere in the world. And they talk a bit about America and our political situation and stuff like that. Obviously, heavy Tim Pool vibes. You and I have always discussed whether or not America is on the verge of civil war or close to a civil war. We had January 6th, which we felt, was a good test of our institutions, and the institutions held, obviously. But in this book, she talks about one of the things that tends to drive countries into civil war was relatively unexpected. We always hear it's poverty, it's income inequality. We hear all of these other things that drive violence and violent uprisings. But really, it's one of the key things that's always there is some sort of ethno-nationalism or ethno-factionalism, they call it. So I'm curious about whether or not that pointing out critical race theory as being, because I really do think critical race theory is pushing in this factionalism direction. It's basically identity politics. Is more effective at dealing with the impending civil war problem than the Marxism thing, which is just like, so what? Who cares?
Right. I mean, it is that. I mean, it is this kind of form of balkanization, definitely, among racial groups in America. If you're talking about purely like the optics of it, okay, if we're gonna go Vosh on the whole conversation, then I would obviously agree 1,000% that labeling CRT as racist and primarily focusing on it as being racist will be way more effective to get people to not want to support it. I would obviously agree with that. That goes without saying in America, because in America, people are way more primed to be afraid of racism and being labeled as racist, and not really be afraid of being labeled a commie or a Marxist. because the label has been beaten to death so much, and we've never had a Marxist government for people to have lived under in America to be afraid of, where
Why
racism is kind of like embedded in our history.
when James Lindsay talks about the Marxist element to
Mm-hmm.
critical race theory, what is that? Why is that
He's
important?
just being true though. He's being
No, I know.
descriptively true.
It is completely
Right.
descriptively accurate. Yes. But he's using it in sort of a political way too. He's definitely, I mean, he constantly says, "Oh, it's Marxism, like that's the thing we should be afraid of." And I
Right.
guess that's the thing that really just makes me go, a lot of people are
Well,
just not afraid of Marxism.
I think I think we could be enlightened centrist here.
Mhm.
And you could bridge. James Lindsay could, if he was a little bit more optically focused, which we all know James Lindsay is 100% not focused on optics at all.
Mhm.
Okay.
It seems that way. Yes.
Because otherwise his Twitter feed would look very different. We all know this. Okay. And that's fine. He can do whatever he wants. But if you want to be a little bit more optically focused, I think you could bridge them and you could say this is racism and this is actual Marxism. Because I think it is important to try to get in the minds of the American people that, because you can't, like, the right is already convinced that CRT and woke stuff is bad. Everyone knows that on the
Mhm.
right. On the right, they don't need to be convinced. Okay, that's their default assumption. You have to try to convince the mainstream left and the liberals, and especially liberal politicians, that CRT and wokeness is bad. And I think it's useful. It's difficult because the right has basically cried wolf on communism for so long. But I think it's useful, very useful, if we can really get in the minds of people that wokeness and CRT is anti-liberal,
Mhm.
is Marxism. So maybe that's what we should do. Maybe that's what James Lindsay should be doing. He shouldn't be saying it's Marxist. He should be saying it's anti-liberal. Maybe
Right.
that's the inroad there. Say this is racism and this is anti-liberal.
You're still dividing your forces, though. That's the thing that,
What do you mean?
well, these civil wars start because groups develop these ethnic factions, which are, I mean, it's completely 100% identity politics. And
Right.
critical race theory is literally designed to be that kind of thing, to develop an ethnic component to politics and to belittle another class of people, specifically whites, which is causing them to develop an ethnic identity and engage in these political factions as well. Marxism has nothing to do with any of that. Marxism actually, in the context of
Marxism is about dividing people by class.
right, but in the context of dipping democracies into some kind of civil war, they don't happen when people are dividing themselves by ideology. So I'm
I don't
less
think that's
worried.
true at all. Wait,
Well, according to the book, it is completely true. But I mean, if you want to contest that, people dividing themselves by ideology tends to have different ethnic groups that overlap with one another. So it's much harder to form these ethnic coalitions.
no, I mean I agree with that, but but the issue isn't just civil war to watch out for. The issue is also to watch out for revolution. And Marxism definitely has spawned revolutions across the globe that have all led to disastrous consequences.
Right, but
Okay.
I would say, and they
And
look at,
what is the difference between a revolution and a civil war? Except in a civil war, like in a revolution, it's viewed as like, the less powerful versus the more powerful. And the civil war is just sort of equalness on both sides, generally. At least how it's conceived of when you use these words. So I don't think it's that different.
I think if you looked into the details of that, these
Mm-hmm.
civil wars are driven by an ethnic component. They might also have
Yeah,
Marxism, but
maybe.
Marxism is secondary to the ethnic
Right.
component. That's why I just feel like focusing on the ethnic component
No, but
is far more useful. Well, maybe it's not useful because you are identifying the ethnic component.
It's no, listen, I agree with you that focusing on the racism aspect of it is useful. I completely agree with you, is more useful in terms of getting Americans to not want to be on board with it. However, the problem here is, and this is what I think a lot of people don't understand. When you see the mainstream and you see mainstream politicians and mainstream news anchors and all this shit, and they're like just regurgitating woke talking points, and they're just saying CRT is about teaching Black history and all this like bullshit. Okay. The people doing that are doing it out of ignorance. Mostly. They're not like, I think the squad knows what's up because they've used specific language that shows they know what's up. But most people who talk about this have no fucking clue what CRT is, and they have no fucking clue what wokeness is. They don't realize that it is literally anti-liberal Marxism and that they are sowing the seeds of their own destruction. And I think that is an important, that if the mainstream left could wake the fuck up to that idea and realize that the shit they're peddling is really the antithesis of everything they believe, then they would stop peddling it. Because the problem is you have a bunch of normies, a bunch of middle-aged or older adults who have a bunch of young staffers running around saying, and the adults will say, what do the kids on TikTok want to hear? And then the stupid staffers say, oh, they want to hear you talk about equity. They want to hear you talk about white privilege. And the adults just think, oh, this is just the normal evolution of, liberal values, in the civil, because what they're thinking is, oh, when I was, their age in the 60s and 70s, I fought against the man and the adults, and they thought what I was doing was crazy. And I was just advocating that Black people be treated the same. And so they're projecting their past experience onto what's happening now. The problem is it's not what's happening now. They're literally promoting Marxist bullshit. And
right, but
that's never going to
change.
Bullshit, but that's never going to change unless they actually realize that they're promoting anti-liberal values.
Yes, but I think framing it as they're promoting racist values is clearer than framing it as they're promoting Marxist values.
There's an issue with that. And that's just as a lot of people on the left are desensitized to being called communist, because you probably remember this better than I do because you were far more aware of the world than I was. In the 80s and 90s, whenever any liberal wanted to promote like any fucking social program, it's like, oh, you're a communist. Oh, welfare is for communism. Anything remotely liberal was like communist back then.
Yes. Yeah. It used to work. It's lost its cachet today.
Right. Calling someone liberal, part of the reason that the term progressive even became popular was that the word liberal was so demonized in the 80s and 90s. And it was so associated with being a crazy lefty commie that people didn't even want to be called liberals anymore. And that's sort of how the term progressive became popular in America. But so it's the same thing, but calling people racist, especially calling people on the left racist, has also been desensitized, because in the 80s and the 90s, when it came to Republicans advocating against affirmative action policies, they would constantly say, this is racism, this is racism, this is racism. So people on the left are already sort of wired to ignore that. Now, I think you should still call it racism because it is, but I don't know if it's as effective as you think it is. What people on the left have never been called publicly, especially by people on the right, is anti-liberal. They don't even know how to respond to that. Their brains would explode. They say, well, what do you mean I'm anti-liberal? That doesn't make any sense. Of course I'm liberal. And if you can really cement that idea into the public, CRT is anti-liberal, I think you would get a lot more production value from that.
You're still talking in terms of ideology. The thing that sticks out for me is that civil wars happen when these conflict entrepreneurs step in and start playing identity politics with race. I see critical race theory as a clear example of that. So if I want to make an argument, if I want to say, listen, there's been all this research done about how civil wars happen, how democracies slip into autocracies through these ethnic struggles that create civil wars. I'm talking about something completely different than Marxism. Like, how does Marxism doesn't even contain any kind of ethnic component. So I just with the entire way that James Lindsay is framing this debate seems to ignore the fact that critical race theorists are coming out and they're literally forming these racial factions to create strife, to foment civil war.
I don't understand. I feel like we're going in circles. I don't understand your point at all, because he's not ignoring that. He calls it race Marxism. He calls it racism.
But it's not racism though. He calls it race Marxism. But I guess he does.
Well, no, when he says
call
race
everything
Marxism,
racism. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, when he says race Marxism, he realizes that implicitly means racist. Now, you could say that he doesn't necessarily do a good job explaining that to other people, and I think that's
right.
I think part of James's problem is, like, when he's sitting at his desk and he can give like a 2-hour lecture video for New Discourse, or even when he's talking to Thaddeus Russell. His conversation with Thaddeus Russell is the best breakdown of CRT I've ever heard, and it's because he's friends with Thaddeus Russell, and Thaddeus Russell has the prerequisite knowledge about Marxism and socialism and is asking him the right questions. And so they're really going into it. But his if you're going to talk about like his performance on Dr. Phil was terrible, because he'll rattle off very quickly a bunch of buzzwords that I know what the fuck they mean, and people listening to the stream know what the fuck it means, but the average person doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about, and it just sounds like gobbledygook.
Yeah. I guess my critique is really when I listen to James Lindsay, and I mean I listen to a lot of James Lindsay. I feel like the real danger of entering Tim Pool's Civil War from critical race theory.
Well, did you listen to him on Tim Pool? Because I didn't, so I don't know if that's what you're drawing.
I didn't listen to him on Tim Pool.
Okay.
No, I'm just talking in general, and Tim Pool is the one that's always talking about Civil War.
Okay.
And I mean, I checked this morning. I shared with you. There's this polity data series that they talk about where they measure. There's actually a phase between autocracy and democracy called Anocracy. I shared it with you. You probably didn't have time to look at it, but so we're 10 is the high score for democracy. We're currently sitting at an 8. I had no idea that America had dipped down as low as a 6, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, I listened. That was from the Michael Shermer.
Yeah, so you did listen to that.
Yeah, I did listen to that. Yeah.
So I for the first time thought, holy shit, maybe fucking Tim Pool is right. We are headed towards civil war. But as soon as she started talking, and I did listen to Michael Shermer talk, and then I got the book and I started listening to that today. As soon as I realized that it really is the fucking ethnocentric stuff that gets people, that starts these civil wars, it just, for me, immediately it made me think, well, that is the draw of critical race theory.
Yeah, but
obviously they're sneaking it in, but all the Marxism is just misdirection.
There is an issue here, which is that when people, especially researchers and historians, look at causes of civil wars, there's only been one civil war in America, obviously. And even though it was about slavery, it wasn't about ethnic differences. It was white people fighting white people. It was literally about cultural differences, economic differences, and power differentials.
Yeah, but
it was the slave states versus the free states. That was the primary political issue driving people back in those days.
There's been like 50 civil wars though since 1990. She has a complete data set. They're not just talking
in America.
about, No, they're talking about all over the world. They're talking
Oh,
about
okay.
civil
Right, right,
war in
right.
general.
So,
Yeah.
right. So what I was going to say is, so these researchers, since there's only been one civil war in America, they focus primarily on civil wars in
Hmm.
other countries. Okay.
Yes, of
And
course.
as we talked about regarding our research for Ukraine, Russia, it's insane that, the white nationalists have this idea that there's a shared white European identity,
Hmm.
because all you have to do is look at the history of Europe to see it's just nothing but thousands of years of bloody conflict of white people murdering other white people because of some tiny ethnic or cultural difference between
Right.
them.
Correct. Yes.
Right. So,
Sunnis,
but I don't
Sunnis and
think,
Shias are both the same color. The Rwandan Tutsis and Hutus are both the same color, but they
right.
still focus on it as ethnicity.
Right. Or the
Right.
breakup of Yugoslavia. It goes on. It goes on forever.
Right.
And but what I'm saying is I think it might be incorrect to look at the history of Europe and Africa and Asia and their civil wars and then project that onto America, because America is so different than those countries. Most other countries in the world grew and were based around some specific ethnic group or tribe, really, in an area that has thousands of years of history that goes back in that country. Where in America, it's never been that way. It's always been a hodgepodge group of people coming here from other cultures and kind of being part of the super identity of American. That's
Hmm.
always the way it's been.
Yes, and we've
And
had
so,
a culture that's fought against ethnic factionalism as it is. Yes, I
right. So I
agree.
don't think right. So I don't think that the ethnic factionalism is going to lead to the civil war in America, can be projected onto America
Well,
the way it happened in Europe and in Africa.
I do. Well, they make a compelling case that ethnic factionalism always leads to, well, not always, but when civil war happens, ethnic factionalism is an essential component of creating the environment for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I just kind of had this aha moment with CRT. Critical race theory is definitely ethnic factionalism.
Yes.
And what Christopher Ruffo is doing is trying to fight it as ethnic factionalism by saying it's racist and we as Americans are not racist and we should avoid that.
Okay.
But I don't see I see James Lindsay going off in the left field saying it's Marxism, and I have no idea how that
Well,
traces back to.
so they're both doing very different things. So
Yeah,
James Lindsay is digging deep into the ideology and the academics of it to understand what the fuck it is.
right. I get that.
And
I
right,
totally get that.
I understand.
But
And in that,
I kind of feel like that's all post hoc rationalization for
no. I'm
ethnic
saying,
factionalism.
no. I'm saying if people have different intentions and they're going to have different goals and they're going to have
Hmm.
different outcomes. Okay. James Lindsay is, he's a mathematician
Hmm.
who got sucked into becoming like a woke academic researcher. Okay. Starting with the Sokol hoax and all that stuff. And now he's moved on to CRT. And I think he said he wants to move on to something else soon anyway, because he feels like he's gotten to the bottom of CRT.
Hmm.
And so he's looking at this from an academic perspective where he's saying, I'm going to dig into this research. I'm going to dig into these writings, figure out what the fuck it is. I'm going to tell people what it is. That's his motivation. That's his goal. And that's what he's doing. That's why he's telling people it's Marxist, because it is. He looks into it and says it's Marxist.
Right.
Chris Ruffo has a completely different perspective. His goal, well, he has some other, I would say, darker, more sinister goals. But his goal up front, that I agree with at first anyway, is that he wants to get CRT banned
Hmm.
from being taught in schools, which I agree with 100%.
Right. Yes.
So
Because
he's
it's
looking
ethnic
at this.
factionalism.
We'll pause the ethnic factionalism. Christopher Ruffo will never say ethnic factionalism publicly, okay? Because no one knows what the fuck that means.
Totally. I agree.
Right. So Christopher Ruffo's motivation here is specifically, I want to get legislation passed
Hmm.
that will ban CRT,
Hmm.
which obviously, if we're talking about like practical effects in the world, that's more upfront beneficial than just digging into the academics of it.
Yeah. Then understanding it as
right.
an ideology.
So he's going around because I think Christopher Ruffo doesn't really need to understand CRT. All he needs to do is say it's racist
Hmm.
and it's bad, And so I'm going to create a think tank that's going to write a bunch of legislation that's going to convince Republican politicians all across the country to ban CRT.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what's happening. And so, yes, from that perspective, like if I'm trying to convince a politician to ban something,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be way more persuasive for me to say this is racist than for me to say this is Marxist.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Yes.
why they're both operating in these different spheres.
Yep.
Okay, so I don't understand what.
When CRT comes up and we're talking,
Right.
you go to the Marxist stuff first.
So you want me to go to the racist stuff first instead of the
Yeah.
Marxist stuff? Is that
The
this entire
racist-
conversation is Sitch? I want you to be more like Christopher Ruffo and less like James Lindsay. Is that you? All you had to
Basically.
say.
Basically.
We could have skipped this entire conversation.
No, I think it's a fascinating conversation. I think it's
Okay.
I think it's a debate that needs to be had, because I had no idea. I mean, we kind of grew up in an environment where there wasn't an ethnic component. And I feel like that's a luxury other places in the world have experienced. That in the book they tell a story about a woman who was living in Baghdad before the Iraqi invasion. And the tipping point for her, the woman who wrote the book interviews her, and the tipping point for her when she knew things were on the downhill slide was when people started asking her if she was Sunni or Shia, which no one had ever asked her before and was never really a major component of her life.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like all of this obsession, people asking people, talking about race in the way that we're talking about is definitely heading down that path.
Well, I guess the reason I focus on the Marxism aspect of CRT is because the racism element is I think is like so obvious to everyone that it's not like, I don't feel like I have to keep pointing it out. It's so obvious. Everyone knows it's racist. We've talked about this like a million times.
Right.
The second part of it is that, again, and maybe I should be saying it's anti-liberal, and that's what I think Christopher Ruffo, I think it's complicated, okay, whether claiming CRT is anti-liberal would actually be effective. Because on one hand, I do think that's literally the only possible way that you could get people on the left on board with being against CRT. Calling it racist is not going to get them on board with being against CRT.
Because they're okay with racism?
No, because they don't believe it. They don't believe you when you say it's racist.
Well, hold on.
Okay. They just think you're lying. They've heard that charge before.
Right, because they've pre-disastered critical race theory by telling everyone that it's just Black history. So it's so far, they're like, what do you mean? It's the opposite of racism.
Right.
That's the thing. I feel like the goal is really to shift the thinking away from Black history to, no, it's just racism. It's
right. But I don't know if calling it anti-liberal, Chris Ruffo isn't going to focus on calling it anti-liberal because his goal isn't necessarily to get CRT destroyed at all cost. His goal is to get Republicans elected. And so Republicans benefit from having CRT be associated with liberals. So I don't think they would necessarily want to jump on this is anti-liberal messaging, because that'd be sacrificing some of the political efficacy of being able to beat Democrats over the head with the CRT stick.
It is liberalism. That's what they want to say.
Exactly.
This is
Well, they don't
avatar
say it's liberal.
of liberalism.
They don't want to say liberalism because the Republican Party in America is a liberal party under the banner of liberalism. What they want to do is say that it's liberal like Democrat, because we unfortunately, like, it's one of the most unfortunate things in America is that we call Democrats liberals, because now if you talk to any normie and you say liberalism or liberal Western democracy, they think you're talking about the fucking Democrats, which you're not. Or I'm not talking about that when I say that. I'm talking about liberal principles of liberalism.
This is why this whole line of thinking seems so bizarre and out of touch to me, honestly, Sitch, because you're basically admitting
it's
that people don't even understand what liberalism means.
our audience understands because we've talked about it at
No, I
length.
do understand that,
Okay.
but not the wider, not the
But
wider,
I'm not gonna
the normie
if I were to
public.
go out to a wider audience, I
Oh,
would
so-
probably
okay, so that
lean
makes sense. You're just
much
talking
heavier.
specifically
Yes.
about our audience.
Like if I'm talking to some normie,
But
and I'm talking to a family
don't you
member,
understand you're giving our audience information that they can talk to their friends and family about, and they're going to be talking about liberalism. It's going to be a complete waste.
well, no, because I'm assuming that for our audience, maybe our audience doesn't know this. Okay. I'm making assumptions here. If I'm talking to a family member or a friend, I'm going to lean heavy on the CRT is racism, and then if they're a left leaning person, I'll start to get into CRT is actually anti liberal, both liberalism, but also specifically it is anti liberal because CRT specifically started, as we talked about many times, as a movement against what democratic mainstream liberals were doing with civil rights in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
That's how CRT started. It's specifically against liberalism and liberals in America. And so if I'm talking to someone on the left to try to get them on my side, I open with the racism, and then I'll start to trickle into the anti-liberalism or the anti-liberal mentality stuff. Okay, and I find that that's effective. Now, maybe I shouldn't assume that our chat does the same thing when they go out and talk to people in the world. I don't know how they're trying to convince people.
CRT literally, like, I consider the foundation of CRT being that all American institutions were created by white people to take things from black people.
Yes.
How is that not ethnic factionalism?
Okay. You can't say that I'm focusing on Marxism or liberalism and no one knows what that means, and then say that we should be focusing on ethnic factionalism.
No, first of all, I'm just using it in the context of this conversation.
Of course,
I realize it's a niche academic thing,
right?
But how is this not just rank and file racism?
It is. No one's denying that it is.
Okay, so we both agree that critical race theory is an academic post hoc rationalization of racism, of ethnic factionalism, of trying to create a faction that is organized around ethnicity.
There's a problem here, though, and I don't know how many family members or friends you've had this conversation with about CRT, or any. I don't know if you talk to people about this stuff the way that I do.
I don't.
Okay,
not at all.
When I start, if part of what I've learned is that when you're talking to a normie and you say things like, "Oh, CRT says that," literally what you just said, America was created so that like white people could, fuck over black people. Almost every single person on the left says, but that's true because of slavery. So you've already lost them the second you say that.
Right.
They're like, but that's true though, because of slavery. They don't understand. It's very difficult to be like, no. CRT is saying that because America had slavery, that the very structure of laws, the very structure of our society, even without slavery, is all racist and is all inherently biased. That's a concept that's too difficult for the average person to wrap their brain around. So you have to be careful to get into that.
Right. Yeah. No.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like you get it. I feel like you understand what I'm saying, but
I do understand what you're saying, but I feel like you don't understand what I'm saying.
I don't feel like I understand what you're saying.
I feel like you don't understand what I'm saying.
I'm trying to figure out a way, because I think critical race theory is so obviously trying to stoke racial tensions that I feel like the whole goal is to make people wake up and realize that. When a lot of people, I mean, they're hiding behind this, oh, it's just teaching black history. It's not meant to create people that hate other people.
Right.
When it is.
Part of what I think is effective, and I could be wrong about this, part of what I think is effective of when I talk to people about things is that if you say, and I do always say CRT is racist when I'm trying to convince someone first.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that if you say something like that, if you give something a criticism or a label that they've already heard and dismissed because they read some bullshit article
Mm-hmm.
that lied to them about it, they're already primed not to believe you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say something they've never heard before, they're like they have to pause. Like the cognitive dissonance gets kicked off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always noticed when I'm talking to someone about CRT and I'm like, oh, it's racist, blah, blah, blah. I hear all the same talking points. It's not racist, just about teaching Black history. You're just regurgitating Republican talking points, Sitch. Blah, 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 blah. I've gotten that argument like a million times. And
It's
then
a
I
moral
say,
panic, Sitch.
right. This is a culture war, Sitch. Well, I don't know why you're focusing on the culture war. Trump was the worst president ever, and he's going to bring fascism. I hear this shit like constantly. Okay, when I talk to the normies, but then I'll be like, CRT, CRT is anti-liberal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I say that, there's like this pause, and then their brain like doesn't know how to react, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" And suddenly, then they have to actually listen to what I'm saying.
I just come out and tell them it's ethnic factionalism, and they
there you go. I'll say
they
ethnic
go
factionalism,
running.
and they'll just be like,
they don't know what that means.
You're right.
All right.
Whatever. Anyway, I feel like we've
I haven't convinced you. I totally haven't convinced you at all. But
I don't even know what you're trying to convince me of. I literally don't understand what you're trying to convince, because we agree.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't. All you're saying is, I feel like all you're saying is, Sitch, I want you to not say that this is Marxism and just say it's racism, and that's it. That's what it sounds like you're saying.
Well, not really. I just the whole Marxism thing just seems completely irrelevant to me. It's interesting. I mean, where it comes from and the roots of it, and all the people that, all the ideas that led up to it along the way. I mean, it's interesting. I don't think it really. I do think you can make a case that it's just post hoc rationalization, searching for things to come out with a system that's completely racist.
Majijin is completely correct. He says, Sitch standing around his family looking like a Trumper while chat has him as a TDS person.
That's perfect. Yeah.
That is literally my reality. That is the lonely road of the enlightened centrist. Okay. Both sides fucking hate you or label you as the extreme of the other side. But it depends, regarding what you just said, Adam, it depends what your goal is. Because maybe on the short term, it would be purely beneficial to just never talk about it being Marxist. Just say racism.
Yeah, that's what you're definitely watering down your message with the whole Marxism thing.
On the long term, if we really want to prevent, because there was like a woke resurgence in the 90s, and then it kind of went away.
Okay.
Right? You remember this?
No.
In the night, remember, that's why Bill Maher had a show called Politically Incorrect in the 90s.
But it was
I know you're graphic designing, so you're not paying attention.
It was a completely different thing, though. It was making fun of the
political
evangelicals.
Well, it was making fun of both. There was woke shit came about very briefly in the 90s, and then it went away. But now it's back, and now it's back with a vengeance. And my feeling is, calling it racist maybe will have short-term gains, and that's good. But if you want to fucking kill wokeness, you want to destroy it, you have to show people that it's literally fucking Marxism.
Well, wait,
and that it's anti-liberal. Because I am terrified. I'm not terrified of the Biden administration becoming communist. I'm not terrified of whatever the next Democrat administration becoming communist. What terrifies me is that fucking pieces of shit communists like Hassan and Vosh and all these other fucks are some of the most popular political commentators for young people. And I'm terrified that the future of America 20 years down the line is going to be open communists running and winning seats because of this Marxist indoctrination when they're children. And us just saying racism isn't going to stop that from happening.
I mean, are you equally terrified that avowed ethno-nationalists are going to be running and winning seats?
No, I'm not even remotely concerned about that.
Right.
Unless
the thing
do that in response to the communists becoming popular. Like that's a fear. But I'm not worried about black ethno-nationalists, if that's what you're referring to, becoming a popular force in America at
don't
all.
we? I mean, I always feel like I already feel like AOC is a total racist. She's completely racist. Ian Omar, is that her name? Elon Omar?
Elon Omar.
She's a fucking racist.
Yeah, but they have to part of why wokeness is so despicable is that it's tricking people, especially liberals, into accepting racism.
Yes, and that's the thing that's the scary part. The Marxism thing is not as scary to me.
Right. So, but they don't realize that Elon Omar and AOC and all these other people are saying super fucking racist shit.
Right.
And they're not going to realize it unless you say this woke stuff is against liberals, is anti-liberal. They're not. You can say it's racist till you're blue in the face, and you're not going to convince. You're going to convince the average person. And maybe this is the difference here too. If you're going out to the town hall meeting and you're talking to the parents who don't like understand what the fuck's going on in the news, or they just kind of follow it from a cursory glance, you say shit's racist, you point out it's racist, and they'll believe you and they understand that. But when it comes to convincing the talking heads on television and in your government, I don't think just saying it's racist is going to convince them of shit at all. They don't care, or they're so primed against it. We covered that what was it in Georgia? Like that insane fucking segment where there was just a very normal self-defense law that was passed. And then you had a black congressman saying this is as bad as like fucking Jim Crow and lynching. It's going to make it, so black people can be shot in the streets, Bob. Like, and you're like, and you read the law and it's like it's like 2 paragraphs. And you're like, this person's insane. What the fuck are you talking? This is crazy that they see that. So just calling it racism, I don't think is going to be effective to getting the quote unquote elites on board.
Right. Getting elites on board. That's an interesting twist, but we can move on.
Well, I think, but to me, that's the difference between me and James Lindsay's thinking. James Lindsay thinks that the elites are all completely aware of what they're advocating for. And it's all intentional.
This is the thing.
And I'm on board with, obviously they don't, because why would elites ever fucking promote Marxism? Because it will totally fuck them over at the end of the day. All the liberals in power right now, in the government and in the media, will all get fucking screwed over by the woke policies that they're currently advocating for. And they're only advocating for them because they don't understand that.
The revelation for me, diving into this woman's work and reading the book, is that people don't pick up guns over Marxism or economics. Okay. People pick up guns.
What do you mean? They totally do.
In these civil wars? What are you talking about? They don't go to civil war over ideology. They go over civil war.
They have a revolution. Okay? They have a violent revolution.
Over ethnicity. Are you saying the Sunni and the Shia went to war over communism?
But what I'm saying is, why are you focused? They went to war over fucking religion, okay, which has nothing to do with ethno-nationalism.
Exactly.
So, right, but religion is an ideology.
Religion is part of an ethnicity.
The Sunni and the Shiites, I believed, were the same ethnic group.
They're different. It depends upon how you want to define ethnicity.
Well, okay, so
the Hutu and Tutsis are definitely the same genetic population, but they're categorized as different ethnicities.
Why? But what I'm saying is you're only focusing on civil war. And I'm saying, why are you not also focusing on violent revolution, which is also a danger?
Civil war would be the thing. Well, violent revolution and civil war go hand in hand.
So the violent revolution in France was not about ethnicity at all.
It was about
the
class.
Violent revolution in Russia was not about ethnicity.
Right, but these are the thing that's interesting.
The Civil War in China was not about ethnicity. The Civil War in Korea was not about ethnicity. Like, I don't think
all of the stuff they're talking about in this book is from like the 90s. It's like the civil wars that are happening now.
Right, but current
environment.
Okay, I can almost guarantee where the majority of those civil wars happen.
If a civil war takes place in America, do you think it's going to be over Marxism? Do you think Hassan is going to come out and
it's going to be over ideology? It's not going to be over race.
I completely disagree.
How's it going to be over
I
race?
completely disagree.
Who's going to be fighting in the Civil War in America over race? The 13% of black people versus all the other white people? Like, how is this going to
Not
manifest?
the 13% of black people versus the ethno nationalists on the white ethno nationalists. Yeah, hell yeah.
That there's less white ethno nationalists in America by far than there are black people in America. I don't know how that's going to become a civil war. When Tim Pool talks about the Civil War, he's talking about the left and the right. He's not talking about race.
You think there's more likely to be a civil war over Marxism?
No, I think there's more likely to be a civil war over political party.
First of all, political instability breaks out, and then conflict entrepreneurs step in. And the easiest way to unite people is around ethnicity.
Yes.
So who ends up winning the unite people to fight? The ethno-nationalists or the communists?
That it depends what the situation is.
It's political instability.
This is the problem.
The situation is always political instability, okay?
No, listen. Like in prison, things break down along
racial
race.
lines, ethnicity.
Right.
100%.
And the reason,
yeah.
and the reason for that is because you're taking people and you're throwing them in a hostile environment.
And the easiest way to bind people together is via ethnicity. I already said that.
Right, but there's no preset society or condition or psychology or culture in that jail that would affect the way people behave. In America, it's literally impossible for there to be a civil war among races unless you're going to say that the whites and the Hispanics are going to fight each other. Like the numbers don't matter. They don't mix in some way that's going to become a racial civil war at all. And I think the problem with like in the book that you're reading, I'm assuming that 90% of the civil wars are referencing take place in either Africa or Eastern Europe. And all these European civil wars are almost all entirely from the fall of the Soviet Union.
Do you think in Ukraine, do you think the Russians and the Ukrainians are different ethnicities? Do you think they think of themselves as different ethnicities?
They think of themselves as different ethnicities.
Do you think that conflict is breaking down via ethnicity?
If you took a DNA sample, is that going to be the dividing line, or is it going to be that they have different cultures?
We're totally dipping into Sitch's law here over the term ethnicity.
No, wait.
I'm happy to use whichever definition you want of
ethnicity. Don't you think that it's about different cultures and not different ethnicities?
Different religions, different whatever. Yeah, however they want to break it up.
Okay. So right now in America, the biggest cultural divide is not race. It's political affiliation.
You're missing the whole point.
I'm not.
Yes, it is now.
Right.
It is today.
Yeah, you're saying if things break down to a civil war, then they'll break down along racial lines.
Along racial lines. And what force are we watching around us right now develop that could possibly break society up along these ethnic lines, these racist lines? What could do that?
CRT.
Okay, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but
CRT, critical race theory, is like the toe in the door to the whole breaking things up via ethnicity. But it's not breaking people up via I'm a Marxist and you're not.
No, okay, I understand that, and I think that's why it's toxic. However, in the situation you're laying out, okay, say for example, a civil war in America breaks up the country between Democrats and Republicans or left and right. Okay. And you're saying that that's going to break down further into some sort of racial conflict.
It is. It definitely is. Of course.
I don't see how it could because when the Civil War breaks out between the left and the right, the majority of both sides is going to be white people. And so how is the left side going to balkanize itself further by splitting itself into white people and black people? That would completely then the people on the right would just win the Civil War because the left would be too fractured.
The people on the left are going to be the Iraqi in Baghdad. They're going to be forced to start telling people what their race is.
Yeah, but the thing with like Saddam Hussein, like I don't know enough about the history to know he was Shiite, right?
He was, yeah. No, he was Sunni.
He was Sunni, and they were the minority.
Sunni is the
and
minority, exactly.
and Shiites were the majority.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So, but what you had is this unusual situation, and I don't know how it came to be because I don't know enough about the history, where whatever the minority culture was had an authoritarian dictator in power for decades. So they literally had all the institutions and all the power, even though they were the minority.
Right.
That's not a feasible scenario in America to happen. We're not going to have like, Kimberly Crenshaw become the dictator of America, or Ibram Kendi become the dictator of America. And then he's going
people are saying that's happening already, but
that's not realistic. Okay. Because at the end of the day, you have to be aware, why are the Democrats running to CRT right now? What's the purpose of them doing that?
Well, because they know the black vote is essential to them winning elections. Without winning,
that's one. That's true.
The vast majority of the black vote, they lose. Yeah.
Right. That's number one. And what's the second reason?
That's the only reason that matters. So
there's another gigantic reason.
Why they're running to CRT?
Yes. What is this? What is the Democrat strategy for the last 6 years?
Tell us.
It's to call Republicans racist.
Oh, correct.
To beat them with the racist stick.
Correct. Yes.
Right. And so that's the purpose. That's the reason why they're doing this. The second they can stop calling Republicans racist, the CRT stuff goes away because it becomes not useful to them anymore.
It is still useful to the conflict entrepreneurs, though, that are trying to stoke a race war.
Right, but the conflict entrepreneurs and the elites have different goals. And I think that's where some of the confusion comes from. As
long as we're in a stable environment, everything's cool. It's when instability steps in that these things start changing very rapidly. I mean, obviously, the description she gives of Baghdad is pretty much like a Western modern city. I mean, obviously, it's run by a dictator, but...
Right, so I can't... Well, is her book about that she thinks America is going to devolve into some racial civil war, or is this you extracting from her stuff onto this?
No, it woke me up to the fact that the racial component is so essential in fomenting violence.
I agree completely with that.
She goes into the situation in Ukraine in great detail. And I mean, that place just has fallen apart overnight because of the situation. So, yeah, it really sucks. Okay. It sucks. But I mean, Tim Pool's always talking about civil war in America. And I got to admit, I'm thinking about it a little more like black pilled-ish.
Well, what we can do going forward is when we have these conversations, you can have the normie take, and I'll have the James Lindsay, nobody cares but our audience take.
The Marxism take.
Yeah, and we can combine our takes, and our chat can hopefully gain the prerequisite knowledge to go forward and spread the good word of the anti-woke, anti-CRT narrative.
Well, it's all a political game until people start picking up guns and shooting people. So,
sure,
which is what we ultimately want to avoid. So,
right, but I don't think we're I don't think we're actually close to that in America.
You think we're very far away from that?
I think we're pretty far away from that. Yeah,
I hope so. I really do. So,
okay,
go ahead. Final thoughts. Go ahead.
No, I have no final thought. Oh, here's final thought. Milk for 200 rubles says the revolution in Russia was not about Marxism either. It was more complicated than that. The Bolsheviks did basically hijack a revolution already in motion. Well, there you go. That seems to be a lot like these revolutions is people are just unsatisfied with. I mean, I read Nicholas and Alexander like a million years ago. And I thought it was just people were unsatisfied with the czars for a multitude of reasons, mostly economic reasons. And then once the revolution is underway, the Bolsheviks, seize power. But whatever.
I had no idea that there was this term anocracy, which is between democracy and autocracy, which is kind of fascinating that we did a 7-hour debate arguing this, and there's all this research on it.
Well, the people that are saying that America's like a 6,
Hmm.
okay, like what were they referring to when they like? Did they look at January 6th and they're like, oh my God, America's lost 4 points being close to democracy? Like, what's the basis of that?
She hasn't covered it yet.
Okay, because that's what I would be curious is to make sure it's not just some like very lefty, worldview.
Yeah. If you listen to that podcast, like it does deteriorate into left wing fear mongering kind of. Did you listen to the whole
Right.
thing?
No, I listened to you sent me two. I listened to the 30-minute one where he's
Hmm.
just talking himself. I didn't listen to the
Yes.
one with the other person on it.
Oh, you didn't listen to that one? Oh, that's the one where that's
Right.
that's the one with the lady that wrote the book, and also how she. I mean, yeah, she definitely deteriorates into we need to worry about right wing militias, which I've kind of laughed off. And like you just basically said, oh, there's not enough of them really for us to be concerned about.
Right.
But she makes some claims that are a little scary because evidently there are some high ranking generals who have talked about there being like fractures, ethnic
Hmm.
fractures inside the military.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, which is a little unnerving.
The problem is like I'm open to those concerns. It's hard for me to know what is real and what is, some lefty like afraid of the
Yeah.
world nonsense.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And in the
It,
podcast, one of the reasons why I started reading the book is because in the podcast, she starts throwing out, she makes a claim that Antifa has, Antifa, the kind of violence Antifa does is 1/10 of the kind of violence that's done by right wing militias.
I don't think
And
that's remotely true.
well, I immediately thought of the stats that we've talked about before on the show
Right. That are bullshit.
where, yeah, where, a guy gets into an altercation in a bar and all of a sudden it's a hate crime, right? Because
Right.
and when it's completely unrelated. So I don't know if she's pulling off of those numbers and just getting bad data or what, but that's one of the reasons
Hmm.
why I wanted to start digging because I mean the story she's telling is pretty scary. And I got to admit the whole Ukrainian thing is really coloring my perceptions of this because
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't think it should.
mm,
The Ukraine thing is a very unique situation and
mm,
not like so different from what's going on in America.
mm,
I mean, we talked about it, like the reason that you have this breakdown between ethnic Ukrainians and quote ethnic Russians is because the Russians literally starved to death the ethnic people, the native people living there, and then replaced them with Russians like 60 years ago. And then with Crimea, they just deported all the Tartars away and replaced them with Russian citizens, which
yeah,
we don't have anything like that in America.
that's pretty fucked up.
Yeah, exactly. But so that's why the divide exists. Like it was manufactured to be like that.
You want to cover your story?
Sure. I would say in terms of like the fear of like the right or the ethno nationalists, being a threat.
Hmm.
I think a good way of taking the temperature here is to see. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, the crazy Jewish space lasers lady, she was at Nick Fuentes's conference, and when she was criticized, like you're speaking at a literal white nationalist conference, she didn't apologize and she kind of doubled down.
Hmm.
Now she kind of doubled down in a way where she's sort of like saying to her, like if you're going to give the most positive version of what she's saying, it's, oh, I'm trying to draw those people away from that to
Hmm.
being more
Hmm.
mainstream.
Hmm.
But also, I like if she doesn't get penalized by the Republican Party and continues to show up at the Nick Fuentes con every year, to me, that would be a giant red flag of, oh shit, the Republicans aren't taking white nationalism seriously, and maybe they are okay with drifting in that direction. So to me, that would be a good way of like taking the temperature to see how that situation plays out over the next couple of years.
They've been super good about banning Nick Fuentes and Richard Spencer and those people from
Yes.
CPAC
Right.
and stuff like that.
Generally, they have.
Right.
Yes. Right.
But if
But I'm
they
curious to see, because like a lot of mainstream Republicans did come out and they did shit all over Marjorie Taylor Greene for that, which is good.
right.
But we'll see what happens going forward with that.
My trepidation here
Mm-hmm.
is I feel like critical race theory is the foot in the door for an openly David Duke style character to run and win. And since these
No, I think you're completely right.
since these districts are getting gerrymandered all to shit, he could run in a primary and fucking win.
Right.
Yeah, they don't even know they're voting for a racist.
No, I think you're completely right. And I mean, this has been one of my big criticisms of CRT and wokeness from the beginning is like the only reason Nick Fuentes has an audience right now is literally because of wokeness. It's because if you tell a bunch of white people, say, hey, you're all evil and you're racist because you're white, a lot of those people are going to turn to saying, well, if they're gaining power by unifying along racial lines, why the fuck can't I gain power by unifying along racial lines?
Yep.
If they're going to call me racist and I'm going to get penalized for being racist, I might as well be racist anyway. Like that's the way a lot of people think.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, I agree that I think that's a big danger of wokeness and CRT in general is that it is promoting that feeling.
And when that happens, when that candidate is running against critical race theory as racism, and that's why you should vote for me because we should play the same racist game.
Right.
You're going to have James Lindsay talking about Marxism, and everyone's going to be like, well, who the fuck is this guy and why is he here?
Yeah, but you're going to have Chris Ruffo or Adam Friended saying, this is all racist. And then both sides, and then the guy on the right is going to say,
well, by then it's going to be too late. Then
it's going to be too
completely
late. Right,
too
late.
They're going to be like, yes, we know it's racist. Move over, motherfucker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. That's the point.
Well, that's why I'm saying this is probably the time to start. Like,
okay.
When that argument is still going to have some sway.
I don't think
when the argument is, how do you feel about somebody coming up to you and asking you, are you allowed to be here? Because you're the wrong color, I see. Right. Like, how do you want to live in that world?
Well, I just completely disagree. I don't think calling it racist has a lot of sway towards moving the conversation.
Right. Yeah, we fundamentally disagree about that.
Okay.
But I'm going to win you over time because
I doubt it.
I use my intellect, my big brain takes to win people over to my side of the argument. Right. I use my little elephant on top of my big elephant to make compelling arguments.
Right. Yeah. Did you see that clip of? I don't know if he was joking or not. I can never tell. Nick Fuentes was like trying to convince his chat that he was an incel, even though he like once kissed a girl or something.
I did not. I was like, saw people talking about it.
It was so strange. I'm like, is this Nick Fuentes' audience is happy about this? All right, I guess. I'm so confused.
Well, that's a traditionalist line there. You got to be saving yourself for marriage.
No, but he's not. He's not. He's just like, first of all, I'm on board with the theory that he's in the closet gay guy. Like 100%. That seems to be.
Really?
Oh, yeah. You don't think so?
I mean, I don't like to speculate against. I don't like to speculate.
There's
about
something
people,
there.
So.
There's something there. You can kind of see he's talking to Catboy. You see a little twinkle in his eye. He talks about women. You see a lot of hatred. You're like, this guy seems a little in the closet.
I thought that was all for clickbait.
I don't know.
I mean, there's plenty of clips that you could take out of our stream and clip out of context to make us seem gay.
Sure, but I don't think that's the case though. See, Zara Richard says
that we're gay.
Zara Richard says, was Nick Fuentes trying to convince his audience that he's straight again? Exactly.
That's hilarious.
He was being serious. He got pissed about it. Yeah, I don't know. He's a weird dude. Bishop Cruz for $10 says, with Nick Fuentes, the woke stuff has done more than that. It has become a cry wolf scenario. Many in the right don't even believe that Fuentes is a racist. Same thing with Fox Day. Yeah, no, exactly. That is exactly it. There was someone whose name escapes me, who was originally signed up to speak at the Fuentes conference, and he heard that he was racist and he didn't believe it. And he's like, I think he was like showed up or he was about to show up, and he's like Googling him, and he doesn't believe it until he starts to see clips of him saying shit. And then he like says, oh no. And then he canceled at the last second. So that's a huge problem, the crying wolf shit. It's because then, yeah, people don't believe it.
Yeah. I mean, the woke stuff is pushing us in that direction.
Well, yeah, 100%.
Right.
100%.
And Marxism is irrelevant to that. Completely irrelevant to that.
It's not, but
well, I mean, ideologically it is relevant, but it's not relevant to the argument against why it's bad to go in that direction.
Right.
Anyways. Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.